The hidden financial cost of war power is rarely counted where people expect to find it. Public debate usually circles around defense budgets, weapons procurement, and the immediate expense of mobilization. These are visible numbers printed in reports and argued over in parliaments. Yet the deeper financial story lives beneath those figures and stretches far beyond the battlefield. It unfolds quietly in households, markets, institutions, and generations. War power reshapes how money moves, how trust is priced, and how opportunity is delayed or denied. The bill arrives slowly and is paid by people who may never hear a shot fired. At the surface level, war appears as a surge in spending. Governments inject vast sums into manufacturing, logistics, and technology. Employment may rise in certain sectors and growth statistics can briefly improve. This creates the illusion that war power stimulates the economy. However, this framing ignores the concept of opportunity cost. Every unit of currency devoted to war is a unit not invested in education, health, infrastructure, or innovation. The loss is not dramatic or immediate. It is the absence of roads not built, schools not modernized, and research not funded. Over time, these absences accumulate and quietly lower the productive capacity of a society. One of the least discussed costs is the distortion of financial priorities. When a state organizes itself around military readiness, it reshapes budgeting norms. Emergency logic becomes permanent logic. Long-term planning gives way to short-horizon decisions driven by security narratives. This reduces the patience required for investments that mature slowly, such as basic science or preventative healthcare. Financial systems begin to reward speed and scale over resilience. This shift is subtle but enduring. It trains institutions to value reaction rather than preparation, and that bias lingers long after conflicts end. War power also alters the relationship between the state and debt. Armed conflict is expensive and unpredictable, so it is often financed through borrowing. Debt incurred during war tends to carry moral insulation since it is framed as necessary for survival. As a result, scrutiny weakens. Over time, this creates a culture where large deficits feel normal. Servicing this debt then consumes future budgets. Interest payments become a silent tax on future citizens. These payments do not build anything new. They simply maintain past decisions. The public rarely connects reduced social spending decades later to bonds issued during a distant conflict. Inflation is another hidden channel. War disrupts supply chains, redirects production, and increases government spending simultaneously. Prices rise not only because of scarcity but because of expectations. When people believe resources will be strained, they adjust behavior by hoarding or speculating. This amplifies price movements. Inflation acts as a regressive force, eroding purchasing power most sharply for those with fixed incomes. While it is often blamed on abstract market forces, its roots can trace back to militarized economies and prolonged insecurity. The labor market pays a complex price. Military mobilization pulls young and able individuals away from civilian sectors. Skills are redirected toward destructive efficiency rather than constructive productivity. Even when veterans return, their transition into civilian work is not seamless. Training mismatches, health challenges, and psychological burdens reduce lifetime earnings potential. These losses are not captured in defense accounting. They show up instead as lower productivity, higher healthcare costs, and underemployment across decades. War power also changes innovation pathways. Military funding does produce technological breakthroughs, but it channels creativity toward specific ends. Technologies optimized for surveillance, control, and force do not always translate efficiently into civilian value. Moreover, secrecy surrounding defense research limits knowledge diffusion. The same investment directed toward open scientific ecosystems could yield broader benefits. The hidden cost here is not a lack of innovation but a narrowing of its purpose. Another overlooked area is institutional trust. Financial systems rely on confidence. When societies prioritize war power, they often justify exceptional measures such as expanded executive authority, opaque contracting, and reduced oversight. These practices can normalize corruption and weaken regulatory standards. Over time, citizens lose trust in public finance. Tax compliance declines, capital flight increases, and informal economies expand. These trends reduce state capacity and increase the cost of governance. Restoring trust is expensive and slow, yet its erosion is rarely counted as a cost of militarization. Global trade relationships are also reshaped by war power. Alliances harden and markets fragment. Sanctions, tariffs, and strategic embargoes introduce inefficiencies that persist even after hostilities cool. Companies redesign supply chains around political risk rather than economic efficiency. This redundancy raises costs for consumers and reduces global growth. The hidden financial burden is paid through higher prices, fewer choices, and slower innovation worldwide. There is also a psychological economy at play. Continuous exposure to conflict narratives affects how people perceive risk. When fear becomes ambient, individuals save defensively rather than invest productively. They prefer liquidity over long-term commitments. This behavior is rational at the individual level but damaging collectively. Economies thrive on shared confidence in the future. War power undermines that confidence even without active fighting. Environmental damage represents another deferred expense. Military activities consume vast resources and leave lasting ecological scars. Contaminated land, destroyed ecosystems, and depleted resources require remediation that is often funded long after the original conflict. These cleanup costs rarely appear in defense budgets. Instead, they surface in environmental agencies, healthcare systems, and local economies struggling with reduced agricultural or tourism potential. Education systems also bear hidden costs. When national focus centers on security, cultural narratives shift. Curricula may emphasize obedience and nationalism over critical thinking and creativity. Funding priorities follow. Over time, this shapes a workforce less adaptable to complex economic challenges. The cost emerges as reduced competitiveness and slower adaptation to technological change. Internationally, war power influences currency stability. Countries engaged in prolonged militarization may face reduced investor confidence. Capital seeks predictable environments. Even the perception of instability can weaken a currency, raising import costs and increasing debt burdens denominated in foreign units. Central banks may respond with defensive measures that constrain growth. These macroeconomic effects ripple through everyday life yet remain abstract to most citizens. Perhaps the most profound hidden cost is intergenerational. Children born during periods of heavy militarization inherit constrained budgets, degraded infrastructure, and normalized insecurity. They pay for decisions made before they had any voice. This creates a moral dimension to financial analysis. The price of war power is not only economic but ethical, since it redistributes resources from the future to the present without consent. The culture of war spending also affects private enterprise. Firms that align with defense priorities gain preferential access to contracts and influence. This can skew competition and innovation. Smaller companies and civilian-oriented sectors may struggle to attract investment. The economy becomes less diverse and more brittle. When conflict demand falls, these firms face sharp contractions, creating instability. Health systems absorb long-term costs as well. Physical injuries, psychological trauma, and environmental exposure increase healthcare demand for decades. These expenses are distributed across public and private systems, often without attribution to their origin. Insurance premiums rise, public health budgets strain, and productivity declines. The connection to past wars fades in memory but not in financial reality. Even urban planning is influenced. Cities adapt to security needs through surveillance infrastructure, fortified buildings, and restricted spaces. These choices affect property values, mobility, and social interaction. The financial impact appears as uneven development and increased maintenance costs. Reversing such designs later is expensive and politically difficult. Media and information economies also change. War power encourages centralized messaging and discourages dissent. Advertising revenue, public funding, and audience attention shift toward conflict-related content. This can crowd out investigative journalism on economic mismanagement. Poor financial decisions then persist unchallenged, increasing long-term costs. When wars end, the expectation of peace dividends often disappoints. Demobilization is complex. Industries built around conflict resist contraction. Political incentives favor maintaining readiness. As a result, high spending levels persist. The hidden cost here is inertia. Resources remain locked in patterns justified by past threats rather than current needs. In the international system, war power encourages arms races. One nation investment becomes another nation anxiety. This reciprocal escalation multiplies costs without increasing overall security. From a financial perspective, it resembles a negative-sum game. Wealth is consumed to maintain relative position rather than to improve absolute welfare. Cultural memory also shapes economic behavior. Societies that experience repeated conflicts may internalize scarcity mindsets. They prioritize survival over experimentation. This conservatism can protect against shocks but also limits growth. The cost is invisible because it appears as normal caution rather than lost possibility. Ultimately, the hidden financial cost of war power lies in what never happens. It is the business never started, the cure never researched, the community never rebuilt, the trust never restored. These absences do not appear on balance sheets, yet they define economic reality. War power concentrates attention on immediate threats while draining the quiet foundations of prosperity. Understanding these costs requires expanding the definition of finance beyond budgets and markets. It demands attention to time, trust, and human potential. When these elements are eroded, money alone cannot repair them. The true price of war power is paid not only in currency but in the narrowing of futures.